Hello, everyone. Welcome to our impromptu lunch conversation. I'm joined by Shane McCombs and Chase Hughes. Shane comes to the ILF uniquely primed with more than 20 years of experience in the tech industry, combined with more than a decade of experience in C-level roles. In those critical capacities, Shane led enterprise-wide initiatives in both project management, customer relation management and acquisition, policies and procedures, process improvement, and infrastructure. Shane's also an accomplished public speaker and trainer focused on change management, professionalism, social engineering, and corporate security. In the past, he volunteered for the Autism Hope Alliance and currently donates his time to local businesses as a trusted advisor. And Chase is the CEO of Applied Behavior Research, and after 20 years in the US military, Chase is a leading expert in behavior profiling, influence, and interrogation, and holds multiple certifications in neuroscience and neurochemistry from Harvard University. The audience here should be aware that there may be mature or triggering content that may come up during this conversation. It's a real pleasure to have both of you here for this lunchtime conversation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Ryan.
As Ryan just said, this is pretty much an impromptu conversation. So there's no real outline here. We just wanted to get together and talk about some areas where the Innocent Lives Foundation and Chase and his professional life, where they have some overlap, and just basically talk. We want to be able to have you guys ask questions as needed. Ryan will help to facilitate that, and just hang out, see what is on everyone's minds. So Chase, you've got a couple of things up. You have a book that is out right now, and it's a 6-minute X-ray. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, it looks kind of medical-ish, but it's a rapid behavior profiling book to profile human behavior in about 6 minutes. And it's a book that's actually used by the anti-human trafficking teams. We teach it to police around the country, and even intelligence agencies, and psychological warfare and PSYOPs for Army Special Forces use the 6MX system now. And it's a pretty cool deal. There's a lot of teams around the world that go around to human trafficking sites. And for anybody that's familiar with that, a lot of times, around 80% of the time, those people will tell you that they're completely fine, they're safe, they're not being held against their will, and that they're not being threatened with any kind of bodily harm or being turned over to the authorities because they don't have a passport. So it really helps to be able to understand how to get a good read on a person from a good distance, for sure.
And so if you guys have an interest in that, this got me pretty excited. Typically, Chase's classes, trainings are in the thousands of dollars. Because you're attending here, Chase is making available a coupon code, and you'll be able to take that class for, Chase, what is it? I don't want to get it wrong.
99, and please do not share. Please do not share the coupon code. Obviously, we're on the honor system, but it's 99 for all classes. Interrogation class is 99, and the 6-minute X-ray is 99. And I'll post up the coupon codes if you want. The coupon code for the 6-minute X-ray entire course is HHC 2021.
You can also see us in the ILF room. We'll help you with that also later if you like. Sorry, Chase, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, and no worries. Thank you. And the interrogation, if you'd like to take the interrogation course at all, the coupon code is HHC INT, as in interrogation.
HHC INT, correct? All right.
Yes, sir.
Got it. So, Chase, in your class, you were talking about the laws of human behavior. And so being from the ILF, when you mentioned those laws, it like immediately rung a bell. So our mission statement is that we unmask child predators to help bring them to justice. So if you guys are not familiar with the Innocent Lives Foundation, we are a non-vigilante predator hunting organization. And so we literally try to unmask these people who are hiding out there on the internet and abusing children. And so for the people who work in the PIT, which is the Predator Identification Team, their superpower is literally just extreme OSINT, being able to go in and take just a little bit of information and open that person wide up as to who they are in real life. And so when Chase was going over the laws of human behavior, law number 2 and 3 is that everyone is wearing a mask is number 2. Number 3 is everyone pretends not to wear a mask. And so even though the verbiage and the use of the word mask is a bit different, it is interesting. And Chase, do you mind telling us a little bit about laws number 2 and 3?
Yeah, so I think everybody does have a mask. Everybody does wear a mask, and it's much different than hiding on the internet. But I think there's some potential correlation there that as we grow up, we tend to present a part of ourselves to the world that's different than our true identity. And of course, you'll meet people who say, well, I'm 100% authentic. And we'll meet people who think they are anyway. But we have a persona. We have a projection that we put out to the world, and we have some stuff that goes on inside of our head. And the stuff, 100% of what goes on inside your head does not come out. Therefore, we have a mask. There's something between the inside of your head and the outside world. And I think as we grow up, the number one thing that regulates how we behave in social situations is what caused us to feel shame as we were growing up. And typically, when you meet a person, whether they're a predator or an everyday human being, the mask is typically the polar opposite of whatever that person is most ashamed of. And that's all of us. So we all carry around little bits of shame with us, and nobody's immune to that. So typically we'll see someone who has a really strong mask in one area, and that's typically what they're most ashamed of, or most embarrassed about, or something that's in the dark corner that's becoming the opposite of the mask. And we see that definitely, I think, in predators. And I think you'd probably be able to speak to that a lot better than I could, Shane.
Yeah, we had one case that was pretty horrific, and it's one of the few that we've highly anonymized it, and we talk about it publicly a little bit. And this guy, I really don't want to go into the details. The short story is this: he was a horrific individual doing horrible things, and yet to his family and to his friends and to his surface social media, he looked like the nicest guy in the world. And yet when you rip that mask off and you begin to understand what he was truly doing in real life, it was sick. And so people do hide, and they hide behind whatever they can hide behind. And so I think when you come into the situation with a predator, it just now comes to an extreme. So as Chase is saying, we all do this. It's part of what our natural human makeup. It's part of being human. And yet when you have people who take it to these extremes, that's when we see these ridiculous cases that happen.
So true. So true. And have you over time, and this obviously is not scripted whatsoever.
No.
But over time, have you noticed that there is a typical pattern with these people? Not just from a psychographic perspective, but on just online behavior. Do they typically act a certain way online?
Well, there are always, I guess, milestones or markers that you will see, especially in the predatory behavior. So we're going to do action A, and they're hoping for result B. So we see patterns like that. Because we do not interact with the person at all, we have almost no insight as to who they are as individuals, other than what we can assume from our training as social engineers. So,
Right.
We say that we use OSINT and social engineering to be able to figure these guys out. And of course, the natural question is, how can you social engineer someone you're not talking to or interacting with? And the answer to that is that we can expect particular behaviors or particular reactions, or we can also take what we know about social engineering and anticipate where the best place to spend our time may be, say running down a certain rabbit hole.
That's great. And I think this is a quote from Dr. Phil, but I think it is absolutely fabulous that the best predictor of all future behavior is relevant past behavior. And it seems simplistic, and people tend to dismiss something that can fit on a Post-it note. But that's something that's really relevant and worth not just knowing it or writing it down somewhere, but actually making that part of your thought process throughout all of our lives. That could have kept me out of a bad relationship or two, and it could have kept me out of a bad business deal or two. And I think, we can all look back and see that, but especially in the work that you guys do, I can imagine that is immensely valuable to be able to predict what's coming next.
Yeah. And, it's a matter of just, I don't know, doing the math. I mean, you're never going to predict these guys exactly what they're going to do, but where should we spend our time? Because, all of the funds, all the time, everything is dedicated to our mission and being straight at getting these guys. So we don't want to be wasteful in any way. Yeah. So having this background, this greater understanding of humans helps us to stay pointed in the best direction possible.
That's fantastic. And I know that you guys are involved in a lot of organizations that work with victims and people who are kind of recovering from trauma and obviously going through a tremendous amount of stuff. And a lot of people, a lot of times, some of the most stressful times is facing that person again in court. Mm-hmm. And having their defense attorney just try to rip you open and discredit you in front of that, the perpetrator, has got to be horrific. I can't imagine.
Yeah, I cannot imagine being a parent, much less being a child or a young adult, being in a position like that. We as the ILF, we stay away from interaction typically. So once we have handed something off to law enforcement, we're going to let those processes take over. But now, to your point, how do you deal with some of those things? If you're a survivor, what options do you have? Is there anything in your training or background that could help someone with survival? Are there just tips? Are there things they could be looking for? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So when an event has the potential to cause you some serious bodily harm or serious psychological trauma, we have two types of ways that the brain typically reacts, especially with children. And that's either tonic immobility or collapsing immobility. And tonic just refers to tone, as in muscle tone. And basically part of the brain in the amygdala and hypothalamus sense that this is going on. It sends what's called an inhibitory or excitatory signal to this part of the brain right here, which is the premotor cortex. So this kind of planning for muscle movement here. And so in a tonic state or tonic immobility, the muscles become rigid and the person just lays there in full rigidity. But when you have collapsing immobility, the body sends the inhibitory signals instead of excitatory. And during this time frame, there's tons of stuff going on. There's sodium, calcium stuff just spraying around the brain right now. But the body has so many inhibitory signals that are getting sent up in this area and into the spinal cord down here that the blood pressure drops dramatically. The heart rate drops dramatically. And the person just kind of collapses. And after just a few seconds, the pulse ox drops down into the low 80s. So you have about an 82 pulse ox on average, which is your oxygen level that's inside the hemoglobin of your blood. And then you can go unconscious. And if you don't go unconscious, your chances of forming a memory in any one of these instances is very slim. And during trauma, there's two types of memories we can kind of pull out from our head. And one is like central details, and the other is peripheral details. So if I'm questioning a person following a crime, or especially following one of these traumatic things that's happened, the central details are usually there. I was at this place and I went into a room and then maybe something happened. So those are kind of central details. But peripheral details are typically, was it his left hand or right hand? Did your clothes remain on the whole time? Did he pull your skirt up, or did he take it off? Those details are peripheral details that are a lot harder for the brain to kind of hit record on. And that's where a lot of people get really screwed up, because the defense attorneys for these criminals or these perpetrators, suspects, will get up there and have these gotcha statements to where he says, "Oh, well, ma'am, you told me the living room couch was on the left side of the wall when you entered the house. And according to this police officer's body cam, it's on the right side. Are you going to change your testimony now? How many other things are you recalling that are inaccurate?" So that tends to be one of the reasons that those things are stressful, because you get those gotcha moments. And in a time of crisis, most people don't realize it, but the brain is sending out double like pleasure chemicals, not because we're enjoying it, and stress chemicals. So it sends out adrenaline, cortisol, oxytocin, and even opioids. So on the fight side, we have that adrenaline, cortisol, and oxytocin and opioids are going in there to try to relax you and calm you down during trauma. And those have a side effect of doing a couple of things. The amygdala starts basically is jamming down on the record button. And the amygdala is not necessarily where our memories are. The amygdala is where the emotional significance of a memory is. And the amygdala sits about 1 finger's length inside of right there in your brain. And it's tiny. The amygdala just means almond in Latin, and it's about the size of an almond. We have one on each side. But it's the emotional significance that happens there. And with those 4 chemicals there, the brain is deciding, I'm going to redevote resources to calming myself down, or doing something that's called dissociation, where the person goes somewhere else. And children who have grown up to be abused or bullied, their brain has already been trained, so to speak, or highly responsive in situations to just unplug and go somewhere else mentally while something stressful is going on. That was a long answer. Sorry, Shane.
No, it's a fascinating answer, actually. So we have these self-protection mechanisms that are built in. Our body either triggers or shuts down different areas depending on how our body chooses to respond to it at the time. But now in the current environment, legally, that can be a real challenge, because now your body's just physiologically not capable of remembering, sorting, catalog, and re-pulling those details back up. Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you think that's another stressful time, that if you're kind of paralyzed, then you're not saying no, and you're not fighting back.
Mm-hmm.
A person's hand is on your leg and you're not stopping them from doing it. And then the criminals gets up there on the witness stand and says, "Well, she didn't stop me." And I only say she because it's 90% of victims. She didn't stop me. She didn't say no. She didn't say she didn't want to do it. And that becomes a huge piece of this. On one hand, it's just disgustingly traumatic to experience that in court. On the other hand, that's how, especially in younger people, that they can feel like it was their fault. They look back in hindsight and say, "Well, I don't remember fighting back. I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't do anything. I felt paralyzed, and I didn't fight back. So I didn't express my desire for that not to happen."
Does that come into play also? I would assume, is it a safe assumption that when we find ourselves on the end, say we are sitting in court being grilled on something like this, to me, I would think that would be trauma. Do we also experience those same types of things, which then in turn challenges us on our recall and being able to be specific, et cetera?
Yes. So interview alone can really screw up somebody's recall. And I think the modern standards today, and even research that was done the 18th of January this year for Stanford University, suggests that police officers and people who are doing interviews to victims should wait 2 sleep cycles, or that's what they call it, but 48 hours, obviously. So 48 hours before interviewing victims in some cases, because the tendency for multiple questions to be asked by several different people has a very strong tendency to create false memories.
Wow. And
false memories are inside of every one of your heads right now. Like about 70 to 80% of your memories before the age of 20 are a work of fiction. Most of that is because every time we touch a memory, we modify it, and that modification is permanent. So when you go back and look at it again, that modification looks like it's been there since the event happened. So
we're self-editing without even knowing it.
Yes. Every time we think of any memory, we edit it permanently. But creating false memories is something that is very, very easy to do. And that's something I'm not going to teach. I think there's a tendency for some people to think that they might want to misuse that. But yeah. If we want to edit memories, we can do that deliberately instead of on accident. So a lot of times these trauma victims can get help from qualified clinicians using hypnotherapy, which is approved by the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, from a trained clinical hypnotist, or cognitive behavioral therapy. But there's a lot of ways we can go back, and we can leave the memory completely intact. But there's a way that you can absolutely reach down in there and tell the amygdala that the emotions don't belong in that memory anymore. So it's like watching a movie in full volume in HD, and then when you look back again, it's black and white and there's no sound and it's really fuzzy. So the meaning of the situation becomes null and void.
That's an interesting illustration way to put that, from the high res to the low res as far as the effect. Hey, I'm not sure where we're at on time. Do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, please.
Yes, there are a couple questions. One of them is, how hard is it for someone to unlearn those protective mechanisms? Disassociation has proven to be very useful in traumatic situations, but as we grow older, it seems those behaviors can be invasive to day-to-day lives. Can you unlearn these dissociative behaviors?
Who asked the question? What was the name?
Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm scrolling
either way,
through these other questions.
No big deal. So most of the dissociative stuff and all of our automatic kind of instinctual responses go back to 600 million years of evolution. And it's strong enough that, there's a part of your brain that's the size of a peanut called the medulla, not the medulla oblongata that you've heard of. But this thing keeps you alive and overrules anything you try to do consciously. So as a challenge, try to hold your breath until you die. I guarantee you can't do it. That thing is the moment that it senses there's danger, the conscious mind instantly takes over and overrides the unconscious overrides everything that you're trying to do. There are ways to mitigate it through training and repetition, multiple forms of repetition that involve sensory experiences, emotional experiences, being out of breath, those kinds of things that remove you. So the reason that special forces troops don't get into the dissociative state as easily when they're in the middle of a gunfight. But it's going to be really hard to think your way out of 600 million years of evolution.
So we have some other questions about the code for your mastery course that you were talking about, and what the full name of your interrogation class is, Chase.
I think it's called I actually don't know what it's called on there. I think it's called interview and interrogation, and the code is for the 6-minute X-ray course, and that's HHC 2021.
Okay, and then we have a question for you, Shane. So the human trafficking and ILF have always been a dream of Charlotte to support and pursue as an intelligence analyst. She doesn't have much experience in law enforcement field. However, with her degree, she has open source analysis and think it would be a great asset. You don't have a law enforcement background. How can people volunteer for the ILF, and what does it take to become a volunteer?
So we are looking for, if you have an association with law enforcement, that is a definite plus. If you don't, it doesn't mean you're out of the running for being able to volunteer. We are looking for OSINT professionals who do OSINT every day of their life. So it's not within our scope to be able to come in and train you on how to do OSINT. So you need to be up to speed already. Additionally, though, we're also looking for adding a dark web component. So let's say I've got 2 spots open for volunteers, and let's just say I've got 1 spot open for volunteers, and I've got 2 people who are both qualified the same in OSINT. The person who has the most experience in dark web is likely going to win that volunteer position with us. So just to, that's really what we're looking for when it comes to working in the PIT, the Predator Identification Team. We hope to be able to expand that team further right now, but that's a lot of that just depends on our bandwidth financially. See if we can up the size of the PIT.
Okay.
And in order to volunteer, go online to innocentlivesfoundation.org, and I think it is the Get Involved page. And so I can find that for you real fast. And you can go through there and fill out the volunteer application. That will get to us.
We have a couple other memory questions. In terms of false memories, is it possible to ever access the true memory, and what may make a certain memory more false than others?
Okay. So just to give you an example, either you or someone you know claims to have memories from before they were 3 years old. That's not possible. It is absolutely not possible. We have something called neuromodulation, and our neurons are being remanufactured, and something called neurogenesis so fast between the ages of 0 and 3 that new memories cannot form in the hippocampus. We can form procedural memories and things like that, but there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't really work that way. And some of those memories that are rooted in physicality are the most likely to be accurate, and things that don't involve physical movement are less likely. So like sometimes there are even cases of humans that function without their entire brain and just their brainstem. The brainstem keeps your heart going, keeps your circulation, it beats your heart, all that stuff is still working. And you can see this in, it's really interesting. Like if you hold a little baby above a coffee table or right over the floor, you can see their legs start to walk independently. And that's not a mistake. That's a product of evolution, that the brain is sensing that there's ground nearby and doing that automatically, even if they don't know how to walk. But our false memories are linked to some factors: are how often the memory is accessed, how many people have told you about it, and what questions you were asked about the memory. So when we hear people say, I can remember when I was 2.5, I swung on this swing and I ate a red popsicle, when in reality, a lot of those memories that we think are memories are, I looked at a photo album, my aunt Trisha told me a story about eating the red popsicle out there and getting it on my shirt or something. And that goes in to create the memory. But since it's a false memory, it's still a memory. So our brain looks at it kind of like a historical record, but our brains are absolutely not a historical record at all. So it does carry the weight of a memory false or real, and there is almost no way whatsoever, even under MRI studies, to tell whether a memory is accurate or false.
Great. We have another question that says, if someone is interviewed after 48 hours of the trauma, is it possible that some of those details could be gone?
Absolutely, yes. So there's a possibility, if you do it too early, that you'll manufacture memories, and if you do it too late, that you're going to miss out on some things. So that's, I guess, the best practice. I'm not involved with any of that research, and I'm not sure why the 48-hour mark is the magic window, but I guess that's what they've determined to be the best one.
Okay, and we have a follow-up question about the disassociation. It says, can disassociating for too long cause a ripple effect in emotions? So disassociating from certain situations, does that suppressed trauma end up coming out one way or another?
Well, dissociation for too long causes what's called dissociative identity disorder, or what they used to call multiple personalities, and where you have two people in the same body. Theoretically, it's kind of imaginary, but that does come out where the other personality becomes somewhat of a trauma, or lets it all out, or the person can go the other way. And I had a psychology professor in college while I was in the military who said, you will only ever encounter two types of patients in psychology. Some need loosening and some need tightening. And that's it. And that'll explain what will eventually happen to those people if they have a lot of trauma and they don't ever get a chance to really go through it. But if you want to read about trauma, the most fascinating book, and I've been studying this stuff for 20 years, I've never read a book more fascinating than this. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it talks about the body's autonomic response to trauma. Why can a zebra get his throat kind of like almost ripped open by an alligator, and the alligator's trying to kill him for 5 minutes, and then he finally gets away, goes right back to his herd, shakes it off, and starts eating grass again. Not a big deal. But why does it screw us up just to have some guy flip us off at a stoplight? More than the zebra. So that really goes into that.
That sounds like a fascinating book.
It really is. It is.
So we have another question about the ILF. It says, if you know someone who is experiencing online harassment, are they able to send you this predator's information so you can look into that person?
So there are organizations out there that you can address with that, but for our mission, no, that's not an ideal fit. The reason why is our mission is to do the identification work and then hand that over to the authorities. So if you already know the identification, there's really no work for us to do. So we just try to stay real tight to what our mission is dedicated to.
That is all of the posted questions that I can see.
I have a question.
About 12 more. Go ahead.
Chase, you mentioned relevant past. I'm just looking at my notes. The predictor is the word. Why is the word relevant in there?
You'd have to ask Dr. Phil, but I would imagine that relevant means that it is repetitive over time. So not just a past behavior that was a departure from normal behavior for a person. So relevant past behavior would mean if you were an asshole at work every day of your life,
yeah,
the next day you come into work, I would think you're going to be an asshole. But if you were a nice guy at your home, that behavior of you at home would not apply to how I would predict your behavior in the work environment. I think that would be the secondary part of the relevant part of that.
Because I have a friend and she's looking to get engaged, and she's expressive, kind of happy-go-lucky, and she's looking to get engaged with a gentleman who's got a good sense of humor, highly analytical, but he's always criticizing her and saying, you've got a big ego and things like that. and she's kind of hoping he'll change. And that's why this is only a couple of days ago. And that's why when you said that statement, it was very relevant, because she's kind of looking for, do people change?
Famous last words, I can change him or her.
Yeah. I read a lot of boring journal articles. And I've read one recently that women's number one regret, I think in the last 2 years, this compendium of all this stuff, is falling in love with potential.
Ooh.
So let's say that you're already in a relationship and you find yourself there. So this person we're talking about has the opportunity to make an informed decision and slow down and think about things. But if you're already in a relationship that you want to salvage, I think one of the most fun and thought-provoking articles I ever read was What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage. And it talks about animal trainers and how you can apply some of those principles to your relationships. And it's What Shamu Taught Me About a Happy Marriage. And it's at least an entertaining read. And it can help both persons in a relationship work on their relationship.
Wow. And Chase, before while this is on, please let us share how we can attend any of your events or other things coming up as well. If you got any live or those kind of events, please.
Yeah, thanks. It's Instagram's probably best, or you can just Google Chase Hughes. But on Instagram, it's Chase Hughes Official.
Thank you.
So I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed with this online predators is that they get into the grooming phase pretty quickly. And it's not always like the movies to where they say, come out in the front yard and somebody gets scooped into the back of a van and their mouth duct tape shut. It's a lot more often to be somebody they know, and it's more often to be somebody that's closer to their age than we might imagine. Because we all imagine some 50, 60-year-old weirdo going in there to do this. But I think the average age, I think with Chloe what the perpetrator was 28 or 29.
Yeah, so we've all been raised with a certain, I guess, of my generation was all stranger danger. It's the sick old guy in the white van down at the park. Well, the landscape of our world has changed dramatically, and so we don't have to go to the park anymore. We can have it right in the palm of our hand on a phone or on a desktop. So that has changed tremendously. The sad part about that is the whole stranger danger thing. We were all taught that only represents 7% of the abuse. And you say, okay, well, when I think about the inverse, that means that 93% of this abuse is being done by friends and family. And that never gets talked about because it's so flipping uncomfortable. It's really easy to say, oh, I cannot imagine any of my friends or any of my family doing that. But statistically, there's a 93% chance that if the abuse is happening, that's where it's coming from. It's just an uncomfortable thing. And so I think we have a tendency to, we'll go focus on the stranger because it's easier for us to consume emotionally.
That's true. And I think, anytime you get an emotional component involved in anything, critical thinking goes down big time. And even when I teach interrogation and things like that, if a person looks like you, or you identify even a tiny bit with the other person, we suffer what we call truth bias, when you don't see the deception, you don't see stuff going on that other people would see. And there's no way to vaccinate yourself against that. But understanding the numbers and just bring some awareness. And I know that the word awareness is overused like crazy. But what I'm trying to say is the more you know about how your brain can do stuff like that, the easier it is for you to go, wait a second, that might be happening here. Or I'm about to have a conversation with a person and ask them some difficult questions, I need to be aware that this bias might be present.
Well, and I think that holds true everywhere, right? I mean, if you think about, I think you were talking about the Milgram experiment, people going into that just do things that you're just like, I can't wrap my head around how a normal person does this, but just a little bit of awareness up front. If they would have known a little more, I would hope that they would have made better decisions, if they had a few key pieces of information. So while awareness is being way overused, it's still critical, and it's critical in helping to unmask these guys, because it's just us as a small team. Yes, we're being effective and we're changing people's lives, and the children are benefiting. And we know that, and it validates what we're doing. However, every single time we can educate a parent, make them more aware, even if it's making them think about, why am I giving my 7-year-old a smartphone? And okay, if I'm going to do that, how do I keep them safe? How do I do this in a smart and intelligent way? If you're not even thinking about those things, you're losing before you start. And so while awareness is overused, it's critical in us making good decisions down the road.
And I got our last question for this session. When interviewing children, is the risk of memory altercation less or more by using known grounded facts, such as if you knew where it took place, having them describe the room?
I can answer, Shane, if you want. I specialized in this for a little while, and in theory, in college, interviewed a few kids, but the statistics show that having them describe physical locations and things that they saw visually first will make the other memories more likely to be accessed. And that's actually, I had the textbook right here, Memory and Suggestibility in Forensic Interviews. And this is a really good textbook, but having them describe things, especially if it's traumatic, describing rooms and places is sometimes a lot easier psychologically for the child too, instead of exactly what happened. And many times, a lot of these cases are won by a child describing birthmarks around the genitalia of the perpetrator and identifying him that way as well. And just the visual things that they were able to remember from the crime.
Okay, well, that let us have one additional question. So we can take this last one and then we'll finish up here. The attendee asks, curious if you would consider gaslighting a form of creating false memories.
I would say it's a precursor. It would be a precursor, but not the memory formation. Okay.
So we're right about at the end here. So if you would like to come and talk more with the ILF, they have a booth in our exhibitor hall, and they'd be more than happy to talk to you there. Also, be sure to check out Chase's new book, The 6-Minute X-Ray Rapid Behavior Profiling. I believe that's the link to that in Amazon is posted in the chat for that. And just a bit of administrative note, we'll also be extending the networking tables tonight by an extra hour after the magic show seems to be a well-enjoyed section of the conference. So we're extending that by another hour for the end of the conference. I want to thank Shane McCombs and Chase Hughes for spending the time with us here, having a great conversation, really great questions. It was very informative. So I just want to thank you and thank everyone who joined us here today. And I wish you all a happy day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.